Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have Evan Silva on the show. He's a founder of Establish the Run, and he's just one of the best football analysts out there. Evan, welcome to the show.
Ed, it's really good to be back with you.
Absolutely. How are you pumped about these matchups for the conference championships?
Absolutely. I think that there's enough surprise. There's enough, like the Bills Chiefs thing has been going on. I mean, they played 8 times since Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes became, their team's respective quarterbacks, and they are 4-4 all time. Although the Chiefs have won all the playoff games, but they are 4-4 all time. So this is
It's
like
going to
the
be fun.
rubber match. And obviously, the Commanders are the story of the playoffs, and they faced the Eagles twice during the regular season. So we get a lot to chew on here.
Absolutely. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Rank Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Evan, let's just get right into it. Washington at Philadelphia. I have so many little micro questions for you, but just give me your basic thoughts about this game.
Basic thoughts. I mean, these teams played obviously twice during the regular season. One of the big injuries that occurred in the divisional round was the Commanders losing their right guard, Sam Cosmi, to a torn ACL. That's a big concern for me against Jalen Carter, who, if you remember, as a rookie, really kind of tailed off at the end of his first season. He has not tailed off at the end of his second season. He was dominant against the Rams. And so that's a big matchup point, and a big move, I think, in the Eagles' favor. Also, speaking of big moves in the Eagles' favor, the game opened as 4.5, Eagles favored by 4.5, and quickly moved to 6. I thought that was a pretty notable move in the spread. But those are just some initial thoughts.
Excellent. Evan, you are kind of the perfect person, just with your extensive knowledge, to put Jaden Daniels' rookie season in perspective. We all know he's been good, but just how good has he been?
Yeah, I think that there's just a really, really strong case to be made that he's the best rookie quarterback of all time, and we've seen some great rookie seasons. Andrew Luck, RG3 of this same Washington franchise. Um, but I mean, the fact that he's on the doorstep of actually taking his team to the Super Bowl and elevating teammates, this is something that really stood out to me. Terry McLaurin has had the best season of his career. The offensive line, the Washington offensive line, was rated across the board as a bottom 5 unit entering the season. De'Ami Brown is out here being a big-time playmaker in the playoffs. Even before that, Olamide Zaccheaus was making plays for Washington. Zach Ertz has had a nice season at age 35 or whatever he is. But Jaden Daniels' ability to elevate teammates, I think, has really stuck out. And if you want to compare him against Caleb Williams, Romo Dunze had a sort of disappointing first season. Keenan Allen was meh. DJ Moore took a step back from the year previous with Justin Fields. So if you want to delve into that debate, I mean, just the way that Jaden Daniels has elevated the players around him really, really stands out.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think, I'm not sure Caleb Williams gets all the blame there, right? I mean, from what I understand, there was a lot of issues with the coaching staff. You make a change during the middle of the season. The new coach makes a ton of blunders that are just kind of inexplicable. So, I mean, I see the Bears as a team with Super Bowl potential, like in the very near future. I mean, would you blame that on Williams, or are there confounding?
No, I wouldn't point directly at him. But if we were just going to compare those two players on a one-for-one basis, is more what I was talking about. But yeah, I mean, the Bears have a really dysfunctional organization. The Commanders had the most dysfunctional organization in the entire league for a long, long time before they changed out their ownership. I know it's kind of boring analysis and it's kind of cliche, but it starts at the top, and that's a big problem still in Chicago.
Getting back to Jaden Daniels, if I were the Eagles, I would try to take away Terry McLaurin, who has been a threat even before Daniels got there. He's been a very good wide receiver for a while. and I would kind of take my chances with everyone else. Is that what you would do as well?
Yeah, it's just that the Eagles have not really done that. The first time that these teams matched up, uh, Terry McLaurin was not moving around the formation, and and he essentially wound up getting shadowed by Quinyon Mitchell, who also does not move. And Terry McLaurin had one catch for 10 yards the entire game. But then in their second meeting, Cliff Kingsbury started to move him around a little bit more, and Terry McLaurin had a nice game, scored a touchdown, had I think like 65 yards. It's just the Eagles don't have a history of trying to take a specific player away. So I don't know. Are they going to make that adjustment in this particular game? I'm like you. I think that they probably should. I just don't know if that's actually going to happen.
Do you think Quinyon Mitchell plays after the injury last week?
I do. I think that we're doing this on what Thursday morning, and the reports initially, the first injury report came out on Wednesday, and I think he's looking like he's in good shape. He's going to play.
Evan, tell me a little bit more about how you would evaluate Jalen Hurts and the Eagles' pass offense. I think this is a unit that's got a ton of potential with the weapons that he has: AJ Brown, Devonta Smith. But when I look at my adjusted passing success rate numbers, they're actually below NFL average. How do you rate that unit?
I think it's about league average, and I think that the Eagles know that, and that's why you see them, not pulling the trigger on a lot of pass attempts on a week by week basis. They also have the best offensive line in the league. They've got the best running back in the league. So they play a certain way to sort of mask the deficiencies of the passing game. Now the last time we saw Jalen Hurts really air it out was against the Steelers in, I believe, Week 15,
Yeah,
and
pretty recent.
he lit up the Steelers, and then he had a concussion, and then they rested, and then they've really limited him in the playoffs. I don't think he's incapable of having a big game, from a passing standpoint, but that's just not really what they do. And if you look at Saquon Barkley's numbers as a rusher against this same Washington defense during the regular season, I would expect more of the same. That we're going to see a really, really run heavy game plan, and that Philadelphia is going to have success running the ball against Washington.
For sure. I mean, that was going to get into my next question. You are established the run. I fully expect the Eagles to do that. My numbers have Washington and the Los Angeles Rams about the same in terms of defensive success rate against the run. We clearly saw what Barkley did last week. I also have this idea that if you want to stop just one player, you really should be able to do that. Devote enough resources to the line of scrimmage.
Mhm.
Make them beat you over the top. Uh, yeah. So How does Washington approach stopping Saquon Barkley?
Oh man, it did help to get Jonathan Allen. I thought back last week. He's been out for the majority of the season, um, but I don't know. I think it's going to be really difficult. The offense. They snap the ball, they get off the line first, so they have that advantage. And then when you combine it with the fact that the Eagles, who, by the way, their offensive line has been remarkably healthy this year, they've had all kinds of offensive line injuries historically. They've been remarkably healthy this year, and all their dudes are there, all the starting guys are there, and they're just, I mean, they're really, really hard to stop. They're like, I don't know that Washington's going to be able to stop them. I think that they'll try to contain him, but I don't think that they'll be able to stop them.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like even if they do, Washington doesn't really put up too much resistance in the secondary, right? So if you do have
Yeah,
to go to Plan B, throw the ball deep, um, they'll be able to do that, right? I mean, maybe not at the same rate that Detroit was able to last week because they were able to move the ball. They just couldn't get over 5 turnovers. But if they do have to go to Plan B, I think Philadelphia will be able to air it out.
yeah. One of the biggest matchups in the secondary, I think, is going to be Marshawn Lattimore against AJ Brown. Now, Marshawn Lattimore was out for the majority of the season with a hamstring injury,
Right.
and in the playoffs, he hasn't been great, but he's been in there. But that is like specifically why the Commanders traded for Marshawn Lattimore, I believe, was to match up with receivers like Mike Evans, who they saw in the wild card round, and then now AJ Brown, similar style, physicality sort of receiver, and so we'll see if it works. I'm betting on AJ Brown though.
For sure. I'm just kind of befuddled to see his stat line from last week. I forget what it was, but it was like one catch for
Yeah. He
a
did
handful of
have
yards.
he did make a catch down the right sideline that I think he would have been real close to the end zone where he could I think that if it hadn't been snowing like that, if the surface was a little bit more grounded, that he wouldn't have like slipped out of bounds. He made a big
Mm,
catch, but it didn't count.
got it. Yeah. So, but you still see the potential there. Obviously, the man's reading his book on the sideline, getting his
Yeah.
mindset. You know,
Yeah.
um, it's going to be all good. Last question before we moved on to the next game. You did mention Jalen Carter not being particularly good towards the end of last season, his rookie year. No one on that Eagles team was good towards the end of the year. Really,
No.
just kind of inexplicable. Doesn't seem like that's what's happening this year, but do you have kind of a post mortem on what happened last year?
It's funny to think back to that because they had an epic collapse last year. They had a bunch of injuries. They almost got Nick Sirianni fired. I mean, if you remember that, like there was at one point where I thought that he was going to get fired. Obviously, he came back, and they kind of they got Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore, and Nick Sirianni is not really in like a hands-on role anymore, and I think that that's good. Um, I mean, they're so talented. At the end of the day, like I think that the Eagles have been from start to finish the most talented team in the NFL. And even if you have, Nick Sirianni yelling at the fans or whatever, or AJ Brown throwing a fit on the sideline. Now he's reading the book, which is great. That talent can overcome that stuff, and when you keep winning, that's going to help your culture. Obviously, I mean that's the best cure. People talk about, oh, we have to recreate our culture. You got to win football games. That's number one.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I know that you would agree with that, Ed.
I completely agree with that.
Right.
Yeah. Let us move on to Buffalo at Kansas City. You hinted about how close these teams have been, even though it's been a little bit one sided in the playoffs. The
Hmm.
spread certainly suggests that it's going to be a tight game. Kansas City by 1.5 in some books, maybe 2, which essentially says these teams are equal on a neutral site, roughly.
Hmm.
Um, what break this down for us?
Yeah, so I think that the first matchup quandary that we come to in this game is that the Bills, so the Chiefs finished, we think of them historically as a big play offense. They were not a big play offense whatsoever this year. They finished bottom five in the NFL in 20 plus yard completions. And the Bills allowed the third fewest 20 plus yard completions during the regular season. They play a lot of zone typically, although they did play a lot of man last week. But I think that we'll see them play a lot of zone this week. So can the Chiefs generate big plays? Their wide receiver core is fully healthy. They've got Marquise Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Worthy really came on strong at the end of the season. Kelsey is obviously balling. But can they create big plays against Buffalo, or can they win with like a grinded out approach? A lot of Kareem Hunt, maybe a little bit of Isaiah Pacheco. What? How is that matchup going to play out? The Chiefs' passing game against the Bills' defense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Kansas City gets DeAndre Hopkins, who had one
Hmm.
target for 0 yards last year.
Hmm.
Like, I feel like it's a tough offense to predict, right? It feels like Andy Reid does something kind of different maybe every game. That's kind of the feeling you get when you're writing your matchup column every week.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to an extent. Yeah, I mean, they really, until the last couple regular season games, their offense really turned it on. And I'm not talking about the Week 18 game against Denver where they, had Carson Wentz in there, but the Week 16 and 17, their offense really turned it on. And then last week, going up, against an admittedly really strong Texans defense, they kind of reverted to, all right, we're going to lean on our defense, we're going to run the ball a decent amount, we're going to throw short passes and try to create yards after catch. Kelsey had like one of the best games of his career after the catch last week against the Texans. Um, so I don't know. I think that they probably are going to end up going back to the grind out. I kind of like the under on this game actually, and I'm not usually an under guy, but 47 and a half. I was a little bit surprised that it was that high. I think that this game could be close and fairly low scoring.
Let us Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Buffalo's pass defense. It's pretty interesting to look at their PFF coverage grades from last year to this year. They were fourth last year. They're 31st this season. I do think there is some
Hmm.
signal in there. They're throwing out a lot of the same guys. And now, of course, Christian Benford, who's been their best
Hmm.
corner, or at least cover corner this season, it has a concussion.
Hmm.
Might not play. So what do you think about this Buffalo pass defense?
Well, that's another element to this is that, and it's not just Christian Benford who got concussed on like the last play of last game, and he's a big corner. He's 6'1", 210. You know, he's the guy you stick on DeAndre Hopkins. Um, but it's also Teron Johnson, who's one of the best slot corners in the league. He's on the injury report. He's going to play, but he's playing with like a dislocated shoulder that could pop out again at any time.
Yeah,
And he's a guy who's, because he plays in the slot, he plays in the middle of the field. He sees a lot of action. You know, he's dealing with a lot of hits in the middle of the field. And then Taylor Rapp, their starting strong safety, is questionable with a hip injury. So that's another element to this. You know, are the Bills going to be potentially without two of their starting defensive backs, including their best one in Christian Benford? That could open the door for the Chiefs maybe to hit some big plays.
right, for sure. I mean, I actually did not see Teron Johnson on the injury report, but it certainly looked
Okay.
like he did something bad to that shoulder. I think he did come back after he messed with that
Mhm.
shoulder, right? But
Well, it
it,
sounds like it's one of these AC joint issues where you can play through it, but like it can pop back out.
oh gosh, I mean that sounds terrible,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and plus, like if it pops out and you're trying to, I mean, you need your shoulders to kind of get up to full speed sprinting, right?
Yeah.
Um, it definitely, yeah. So I mean, I do think there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? Because you have a pass offense that hasn't gone deep, and um, you have a pass defense that could potentially allow you to get deep. I mean, Baltimore certainly had a lot of guys open last week, right? So I think
Yeah.
just a ton of uncertainty
Yeah.
there.
Also, Matt Milano, probably the Bills' best cover linebacker, he also has been dealing with an injury of some kind. He's going to play, but you know there are some injuries in the back seven, no question for Buffalo.
Evan, maybe put Josh Allen's season into perspective here. Should he be the MVP? Is this his best season ever?
Well, I have to admit I'm a little biased here because I remember listening to podcast after podcast this offseason before I really started my fantasy preview stuff. And on all the podcasts, they kept saying, "Oh, this is like a semi rebuild year for the Bills."
Mm-hmm.
And then when I
Yeah.
did my Bills fantasy preview, I was like, man, this is not a rebuild year at all. They are remaking things, but you have Josh Allen. You're never in a rebuild year with Josh Allen. And so I actually bet Josh Allen to win MVP before the season. I bet the Bills to win the Super Bowl before the season. So I'm really rooting for that. You know, I have like monetary investment in that. Um, I'm not sure if it's his best season ever. I think that he should win MVP. I don't know if he is after that All Pro vote came out and Lamar Jackson was the first team All Pro. That's typically been a good indicator for who's going to win MVP. But I am certainly rooting for Josh Allen to win MVP.
When you did that analysis this preseason, like what did you think about his skill position players, right? I mean, you lose Stephon
Yeah,
Diggs, and
yeah,
maybe that's not the biggest deal given
right.
kind of how he performed towards the end of last year. But you have Khalil Shakir. What did you think of like James Cook kind of heading into the season?
Yeah, so everyone was making a big deal of the Bills losing Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and I'm like, that's not that big of a deal. You know, it just Stephon Diggs had a nice start to the 2023 season, and he really was not a factor down the stretch. They wound up giving him up for basically nothing, and then they went out. And they used a high pick on Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. We knew he. I mean, Khalil Shakir is like good. He's not great, but I mean, he's rock solid. Second year for Dalton Kincaid. You know, obviously James Cook. They went and they drafted Ray Davis. They played a different style down the stretch of 2023 under Joe Brady. You remember when Joe Brady took over for Ken Dorsey? They started to run the ball more. And I thought that was a good formula for them. They always play good defense under Sean McDermott, but they could have a good formula if they run the ball more, keep Josh Allen on schedule a little bit, lean on a defense that has always been rock solid. It's never been really about the personnel. Even with the Buffalo defense, they're just really well coached, fundamentally sound unit. And I thought with Josh Allen, like he can take you to the promised land. So I just totally disagreed with the popular narrative that this was like some sort of a rebuilding year for the Bills.
For sure. And we've seen James Cook have some big games,
Oh
basically
yeah.
win them some games. Uh, big games against San Francisco, big game against Detroit. I mean, that's kind of the key for me, right? Like when I do my metrics, I don't have a ton of rushing stuff in there because it tends to not matter compared to
Hmm.
passing, and
Right.
and it's kind of hard to predict too. But like, I mean, that's the thing for me, right? And in my numbers, Kansas City had a pretty good rush defense for a while, even though they've with a lot of the same players have been like bottom of the league for the last couple seasons. We've seen a ton of regression there. Um, what I mean, can James Cook have a big game? Like, does that potentially put them over the edge?
With the way that they have been running the ball and imposing their will through the running game, using a sixth offensive lineman, their offensive line has been awesome this year. That also wasn't necessarily the case in previous
Mm-hmm.
years. The Bills have had
Yeah.
a top five offensive line this year. Um, I think that they will be able to have some success running the ball. I don't think that they're going to, destroy the Chiefs on the ground, but yeah, I think the Bills can have success running the ball.
Any opinion on the spread? Kansas City minus one and a half,
Again,
minus
a
two.
lot of bias here. Okay, a lot of bias. I picked the Chiefs to win by 1 point.
Okay.
So there's your cop out. There's your hedge that I got the Bills
There you go.
covering and
There
the
you go.
Chiefs winning. Yeah.
When I thought about this game, Sunday I just well, my mother in law is a huge Bills fan, and I would obviously like them to win. And after I watched the game on Sunday, I was like, oh my god, the secondary is so trash, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
no way they should even be in this game. Obviously, Mark Andrews with the drops and everything, and I was like, I think I definitely like Kansas City spread. After I did my analysis, it wasn't so clear cut. I mean,
Okay.
I think there is a lot. There are some metrics that suggest the secondary is better than it is. I still think Patrick Mahomes gives the Chiefs an edge in this game. So I do like Kansas City here.
All right.
Evan, let us move on. Is there a NFL prop bet that you might be willing to share?
Yes, the one that I like, I think it's easy. It's pretty clear cut and dry. It's Austin Eckler over 25 receiving yards, which I saw at minus 110 as of last night, Wednesday night. Um, he played almost half the snaps in the backfield last week. I think that this is a game where Washington is at risk of falling behind the Eagles. And in
Sure.
those scenarios, Austin Eckler tends to play more than Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson did look good last week for
Mhm.
the first time in a while. But I think we see more of Austin Eckler in this game. If you remember in the wild card round, the the Eagles lost their starting middle linebacker Nakobe Dean to a ruptured patellar tendon. I think that
Mhm.
could lead to, and he was playing a lot of snaps on passing downs. That could lead to more work, just a better matchup in general for Austin Eckler over 25 receiving yards.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, awesome. Completely trust your opinion on that, and looking forward to betting that myself.
Nice.
Evan, let us go to a little bit of off-season news. Maybe the biggest one, at least living here in the Midwest, is
Mhm.
Ben Johnson going to the Chicago Bears. We talked a little bit about the Bears already. How do you see this turning out?
I mean, I think that it's the best possible hire probably for the Bears, certainly for Caleb Williams. Ben Johnson, really interesting guy. Graduated from UNC, really good school, with degrees in math and computer science. Not your
Hmm.
typical old ball coach, shall we
Right.
say? And also, but he did play. He was a backup to T.J. Yates at North
Huh.
Carolina, so he was
Okay.
a player as well. Um, I've listened to interviews with like guys like Mike Martz, who I don't really care what people think about Mike Martz, but he definitely has like he has worked with Ben Johnson. I know that just people have like negative feelings toward Mike Martz in some circles. But
Okay.
he's always been, a quality football mind. He's worked with Ben Johnson in the past, and he was just gushing about how smart this guy is, how well he prepares, and I would be very optimistic. Again, it starts at the top. The ownership has been a problem for a really long time in Chicago. It may be a hump that they can't get over. People were really excited when Matt Nagy went to Chicago, you know.
Right.
Um, but I would be very optimistic, if not just for the fact that it is a great hire for Caleb Williams.
I think Ben Johnson is interesting because he doesn't really come from a tree. He's not
Right.
like under McVay or any of these other guys that have, are just putting their assistants into these top positions, right? Like he kind of has his own set of ideas, has clearly been able to figure it out with Jared Goff and this offense. And, we'll see do you envision a drop off for the Lions offense? I mean, how much does this depend on the brain of Ben Johnson?
I think that they are loaded from a talent standpoint. They're going to stay in house with the next guy. Um,
Right.
one of the guys who I think is really interesting that could really be a difference maker as an assistant coach is Hank Fraley, the Lions offensive line coach. I've heard that Ben Johnson is trying to get him to go to Chicago with him.
Right. I heard that. I saw that. I thought it was a done deal, but
Oh, I saw someone tweet that it wasn't a really reliable account. So I don't know for sure, but that would be a really big get for Chicago, and I think that would be a fairly big loss for the Lions. The Lions still have a ton of talent. Brad Holmes has done an unbelievable job building that roster. But yeah, I think when you combine the loss of Ben Johnson and Hank Fraley, that could matter. Yeah.
had you ever seen Ben Johnson talk before this past week?
Not a lot. No.
I feel
No.
like we went from this stoic, silent
Mm-hmm.
man to a social media superstar talking trash about the Green Bay Packers. And it actually kind of leads me to the question I'm interested in, right? Like, is he going to be like a leader of men? Can he motivate? Like, he's going from an offensive coordinator position where it's pretty easy to give the post game speeches to a guy like Dan Campbell. Can he kind of take over that leadership role? How's that going to work out?
TBD, bro. TBD. We don't know. It's funny because they, at one point it felt like the Bears were kind of deciding between potentially getting Mike Vrabel and Ben Johnson, and
Mhm.
there's two diametrically opposed
Yeah.
guys.
Yep.
One is the leader of men, who doesn't or likes to kick it on 4th and 1, and then the other one is he's going to go for it, but we don't we never heard him speak until yesterday. So and they
Yeah.
wound up with Ben Johnson. I think it's all right.
For sure. I feel like there's a lot of other hires that are, kind of low variance results. I think Aaron Glenn's
Yeah.
going to go to the Jets. I think
Yeah.
he's going to be there a couple years, and then he'll probably be fired.
Right.
I feel like next year, Ben Johnson. I mean, it'd be a stretch, but I think they have talent to potentially make a Super Bowl run. I think he'd get fired after week 4. The locker room goes crazy. Like I just feel like there's so. I mean, that's why I wanted to ask you about it, right? Because I just feel like it's such a high variance hire, and it's an interesting one, right? I mean, of course you give this guy a chance if he's ready to take it, and it seems like he's ready to take it. So
Yeah. The
awesome.
people around here, I live right outside Chicago.
Oh, right.
They are very optimistic.
Good.
And Chicago sports radio is going absolutely nuts. So
Well,
good for them.
as they should be.
As they
I mean,
should.
he was,
Yeah.
Evan Silva, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find all your good work.
EstablishTheRun.com.
Awesome. Social media too. I've gotten lots of good information from you there. Or what's your handle?
Yeah, I'm at Evan Silva. I don't really tweet a whole lot, but you can catch the podcast and stuff. I'll tweet out our podcast.
Evan, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Ed.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting newsletter, 5 Nugget Saturdays, my curated list of tips Check that out at thepowerrank.com.